Hello, darlings. It's Kat with Taming the Tangle. I've missed you. So much has been changing. We're in the midst of 2020. So not only did we have a pandemic, but then got into so much beautiful unpacking of racial injustice here in the US and lots of different issues worldwide. So I think a bunch of us like stepped away from certain types of connecting. I didn't leave tarot. I've been working with tarot every day like I do. And I'd love to talk about all the different changes. Obviously, I've cut my hair, and I know you guys have done tons of things too, where we're trying to get closer to ourselves. I really think that's a lot of what 2020 is about. 2020 sounds like such a stable year. And as I talked about in the judgment video, it's really this idea of double judgment. But some people who are really into numerology like add up all the numbers and say it's a 4 year that's very stable. And that's the card I'm going to talk about today is the number 4, the Emperor in the major arcana. And this, it is a stable card, but it's also, let me show you some examples before I dive into it. This is a new deck I got called the Everyday Tarot. Nice, simple sort of deck interpretation. Lucy Otherworlds, love this guy, looks very ancient. Shadowscapes Tarot with this orb of power, a little bit more youthful take, but still like that deep wisdom aspect to it. A lot of times, like in this deck, the Mary L. Tarot, definitely a wizened leader. And I love the dragonfly symbology that's brought in here, sort of that wisdom passed down through the ages, messages from the ancestors, the sword, all of that, and the different symbology on the hands and the tattoos. And then one more with the star tarot, where we see the coming together of the moon and the sun, the dark and the light, all of that. The Emperor is the earthly father. So he's technically partnered with the Empress, and she's the earthly mother and he's the earthly father. And the way those two energetics work together, and I like to speak of them as energetics, I will be referring to them as he and she, but they don't have to be male and female figures. They can be masculine energetic and a female energetic. So, but just for ease of speaking, I'm going to say he and she, but it's like it doesn't have to be that sort of binary type of energy. But there's different types of energetics that they embody that are based around that. And of course, we always see some blending. But the nice thing about tarot is it does break down the archetypes into smaller chunks that we incorporate into our complex being. So it's not saying you have to embody just this one thing, but you might pull in that component. So I just wanted to mention that. So he is the partner to the Empress, and the way those two work together is the Empress is so much about creation and attracting and abundance and like all of this, and that's all that she needs to be concerned with. She's channeling this amazing creative energy and attracting it, and just things are multiplying and happening in abundance. It's very dynamic, energetic. And the Emperor comes along and goes, okay, like, where are we going to put all this shit? Like, we got to figure this out and give it some order. And that is not her concern at all. Like, her concern is just the channeling. So this is like one of those beautiful partnerships. What I think of as like an ideal business partnership is when you have the business person and you have the creative visionary. And if those two can really work together and bring their superpowers together and each stay in their strengths, and yes, overlap and interweave a little bit, but really accentuate each other's strengths, then everyone gets to kind of live in that place that they rock in. So the Emperor rocks in that place of bringing order to things. And it's not necessarily order to chaos. It can be order to abundance. So that way, you don't, have you had that experience? Like, you keep buying the almond milk because you forgot that you shoved it in a lower cabinet in the kitchen, and then you come across this store of almond milk and it's all expired. You're like, oh man, I totally forgot about that. So the Emperor is the one who kind of brings order, and so that you can actually access the things, and use them when they're called upon. And sometimes it's redistributing the wealth too. You know, an emperor is the king of kings. So he's, you know, all different types of leaders, as we know. You can be any type of leader. And we've seen obviously good ones and bad ones and everything in between, because there's no like, not, I mean, there's those extremes, but you know, a lot of times it's more this middle pendulum. So you know, but I do like to think of a compassionate emperor, and he leads by example. And if he's having lots of abundance too, he's going to want to share that. And he might directly share it with the people, but more likely, if he really trusts these other kings that are, you know, quote unquote below him, he's going to distribute wealth to them, and then they're going to distribute it out. So the emperor is often like a little bit removed because he's looking much bigger picture, holding a bigger vision, and hopefully has set up his world, his community, all of that in a way that those areas can function beautifully on their own independently. And he's there for guidance or for shifting direction of things, you know, kind of even foreseeing what might be coming. Like an emperor is really somebody who's thinking much bigger picture, not thinking what are we going to do tomorrow or next year, but might be planning decades and looking at larger flows. Doesn't get super drawn into the day-to-day dynamic of what's going on, of like individual births and deaths, but more looking at the larger patterns of how things go and holding that type of wisdom. When the Emperor card comes up for me, I'll just hold up a couple of cards so you have another visual besides me. When the Emperor card comes up for me, depending on the specific imagery in the card and the question being asked, all of that, and the position, how it relates to the other cards. But I do generally ask myself, where do I need to bring order to something? Has some area of my life gotten out of control? Now, this can be a physical area, like my studio's gotten a little chaotic, or it can be an interior area, like where does there need to just be some kind of cleaning up, some checking in, some realignment with values, and making sure things are feeling the way you want them to feel in the long run. You know, that we can lose track of the day-to-day sometimes. I don't think that's always a bad thing. You know, we don't want to micromanage our own day-to-day stuff as we're moving through it. We do want to hold true to our visions and be working towards that. So sometimes, yeah, we don't have the cleanest house or something because we're working towards something bigger. But the Emperor kind of comes in and goes, hey, like tend to all of these things. Have you been in squirrel mode and shoving things away in corners and they actually need to be cleaned up? And maybe you're holding on to more things than you actually need. There needs to be some distribution. Like it can be a call to something like that where, you know, time to do some donation type of stuff and tend to the larger community. You know, with all cards, as I always mention, there can be shadow aspects of as well. So another question I can ask myself is, you know, and that you can ask yourself, is there any place where I'm being a little too controlling, maybe a little too orderly, like I can loosen up? Because for me, I got to be honest, I much prefer Empress energy. I am an artist. I love doing that type of creation and just feeling like I'm in that flow. And if I'm not in that flow, I might be more controlling like the Emperor. You know, or it might be like focusing too much on stability, like what the structures are, what are the logistics, what's the schedule, and not just going like, how can I build in a little bit of freedom and fluidity? So to see what comes, let there be a little bit of spontaneity. That's not really the Emperor's language, you know? And so that's why I love pulling multiple card spreads. I work mostly with 4-card spreads, so I can see it's not all one note all the time. We're way more complex beings than that. But when I get an Emperor for, you know, in a daily spread or something, like I said, it's usually like, okay, what area can I clean up a little bit more? Where have things slid? Where can I solidify the foundation? Has something gotten a little overly abundant that I can just bring some order to? So that is the message of the emperor. And as I said at the beginning, remember that he is a fatherly figure. So when we're thinking about the larger arc of the hero of the journey, the emperor is like the last parent before the hero is heading off on his own and starting to get education and worldviews and perspectives from others other than his parents, you know, and there's two sets of parents that he's kind of learning from. And so then it's launching out and getting exposed to more worldviews. So that's why sometimes the emperor can still seem a little closed and structured, is because it's not entering into that realm of the larger story arc of the bigger, broader perspective of what's out there in the world and what other perspectives can we take in. It's still our own sheltered perspective of our parents' input, we know, whatever that parental energetic looks like for us. So just to keep that in mind as well, is that even though the emperor can be this wizened visionary, can also be a little bit of that controlling structure too, of like, you know, but this is what I do to make sense of the world and to keep things safe and to have a beautiful foundation for you to always return to. That can be lovely energy, but it can also be stifling energy. It just depends what your soul responds to and what you're needing in the moment, because sometimes we need that and sometimes we don't, you know, so it just depends on the cravings. And, you know, I think when I think of it with 2020 and that idea of the numerology, is I think that we are all figuring out our own foundations in this year, and that we've had a lot of our structures ruffled. I mean, a lot of them, you know, and that sense of coming back to, right, we can't control the exterior, but we can work more on our interior. Are we solid in here? Have I been tending to my heart and my values and living in alignment with those and taking the inner world out, you know, letting that shine out. So those are the messages that are coming to mind for me today. Hope you're doing well. And I've been mentioning it in videos. It's still coming, the tarot class online. I do private sessions as well as tarot readings. You can always connect with me through tamingthetangle.com and on Instagram at taming_the_tangle. That's the easiest ways to connect with me online. I so appreciate you. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I will be continuing more of the individual cards in the major arcana. We have a few more left, I think 4 more. And then I'll be jumping into the minor arcana. But in the tarot classes that I teach, it's much less about the individual cards, because we can study them, but as soon as you start reading, you have to bring in your intuition. You have to trust what you're seeing in the cards and what you're feeling into with the question and how the cards are working together as a story. Having the individual cards and diving into them and talking about them, that is so interesting. I love that. It's like geeking out on them a bit, because they just become so much more dynamic when they're in a reading. So it's fun to kind of think of them as individual energetics, but then how that changes, how those messages can shift and change based on a specific reading and a specific time with a question and the place that it's being held. It kind of pushes your understanding and morphs it to see how that card can really play out in different situations. So I'd love to have you join me in a future class. And until then, happy reading, and I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.